Welcome to the Bare Naked Shrinks.
Hello, hello, and welcome to this episode of the Bare Naked Shrinks with me, Dr. Danny, and my amazing co-host, Dr. Courtney.
Hey.
And today we have the gift of having Dr. Kelsey Hagan, she, her. Dr. Kelsey is an assistant professor of psychiatry at Virginia Commonwealth University and is a licensed clinical psychologist. So welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you all for having me, Dr. Danny and Dr. Courtney. It's so great to be here.
We're so excited to have you here, Kelsey.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and just like it's great to see you both and great to catch up with you all.
And later we'll talk about how we're all connected in different ways, so that'll be fun. But to start things off, let's get into our
cake and crap.
I'm gonna start with crap. So as you can see, we are all wearing black today. We are in a little bit of mourning, or a lot of mourning. And Courtney and I both have talked about how colorful we like to dress and how we have hardly any black clothes. But now we're kind of, Taylor Swift would say, finding our new aesthetic and hopefully not being functional alcoholics. You know what song I'm talking about, right?
Yes, obviously.
Kelsey, I forget, are you a Taylor fan?
Yes. I wouldn't say like I'm Swiftie, but I do love Taylor. So
I call myself a late in life Swiftie.
Well, like late to life lesbian.
Yeah. So we want to be like gentle about how we speak about this. And early on, Dr. Courtney and I were like, let's not be like political, obviously we're liberal, we're in academia, and Courtney is a raging lesbian, and, I have so many queer friends, and I'm a woman. I feel very strongly as an ally to the BIPOC and LGBTQ communities. So, the loss of the election feels scary and sad, and we all are kind of grieving. And my new aesthetic is going to be Victorian and mourning for at least a little while. But the important thing is that we all just support the people that we love and care about and fight for things that we believe are right. And I just want people to, like we did on our last Shrinky Dink, determine why you think, and really figure it out and look inside yourself.
And Dr. Danny, I think one thing that I mentioned to you just a couple minutes ago before we started recording, and something as a DBT therapist and having conversations this week with my fellow DBT colleagues, there's an interesting dialectic there in terms of, yes, like I am very liberal and have been mourning this election and the results, and it's been a challenging week. And just because it's been hard for me at the same time also doesn't mean that I harbor hate or negative judgments towards other individuals that don't share my values. And I think that within that dialectic, there's still space for holding up compassion and care and respect for individuals that are different than us and have different opinions and beliefs.
Yeah, we have to lead by example, right? Because I think a lot of people from the other side maybe don't share that same sentiment. It's important for us to model that compassion and openness, because we have to practice what we preach, right? Like, we embrace minority populations and we want people to treat them with compassion. And then cake. Well, I'll say this. So my husband is really bummed about the election too. And, he's very different than his family of origin. And so it's been really hard for him. And I would say the cake would be him and I really coming together as a team, which sometimes it's really hard to do as parents of young kids. It's sometimes hard to be on the same team because you're so stressed out and sleep deprived and everything else that goes into being married and having kids on top of it. But him and I have really come together as a team in the days since the election, and we're like getting along really well, which we don't always. I mean, everyone knows me. I love a good conflict. So I've been supporting him and giving him lots of love, which he appreciates because he's the touchy-feely one in our relationship, and I've been extra touchy-feely to him. So that's a positive. All right, Dr. Courtney, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say that my crap is the election results and just how hard that's been to accept. I think Wednesday was a really particularly tough day for me and my coworkers and my queer community here in Seattle. I think I'm still working on processing those emotions that I have around that. And I think the silver lining is that it has been really cool to see my community and friends kind of come together and support one another and stay strong and know that we need to like support one another extra during this time. So yeah, definitely my crap. My cake. Let's see. So last weekend, I kind of had a rough weekend. Like I got a flat tire and my car had to get towed, and then like there was some family stuff. And so I was like not in the best mood, and I was definitely feeling down on myself. And I didn't want to go to kickball, but I was like, I got to practice some opposite action. So I went to kickball and had the best time as usual, because we all know kickball is my new favorite thing. And our team dominated. We won 6-0. And I think it's because I brought pink pom-poms for our team because our color is hot pink. And so we all had pom-poms and we were cheering each other on the side. It was so fun. So it like really changed my mood around and was really happy and fun.
Dr. Courtney, I have to say, I love the pink pom-poms. It gives like Barbie vibes in the best way possible. Love it. Like you both, my crap this week was definitely the results of the election. And, you know, I think like I have people in my family of origin who voted for the other side and were happy about it. And, you know, hearing from them, like they're like individual reasons and they're more proximal reasons for voting for him. And then, you know, and then thinking about, well, my own proximal reasons, like I have a lot of privilege. And then I'm thinking about, okay, well, as a woman, this is really interesting. Like what's going to happen to like my reproductive rights? And then thinking about, okay, I'm a woman in science, and, you know, if the threats follow through to like defund NIH and significantly decrease funding, what's going to happen to my career? And I spent a lot of time like ruminating about that on Wednesday, and probably not the most effective way. And just worrying about like this career that I've worked so hard to get to. Like, what will that look like for me, you know, if things do play out the way that I worry that they will.
I'm glad you are bringing that up because, you know, Courtney and I both
Mm-hmm.
are, you know, 100% clinicians basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah,
like selfishly, I hadn't even thought, but that is really scary. And yeah, you are a bad ass and you're so accomplished for how young you are and how early career you are. And you work so hard and have so many amazing publications and contribute so much to the field that it would just be such a loss to lose people like you and others.
Desperate need for people like you. We still need so much research in the field of eating disorders to identify how we can more effectively treat them, because the treatments that we have really don't have that much evidence to support that they're going to be effective for all people.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's just been kind of like top of mind. And like my research coordinator, that was like one of the first things she said to me like on Wednesday, after we kind of like touched base and debriefed. And she was like, I'm worried about my career too. And I was like, oh my God, like, you know, these are things to worry about, because she wants a career in research as well, you know, even from this early stage. But yeah. And then thinking about my cake, it was actually around the election too. Like when I went and voted, I was reflecting and kind of got like misty-eyed, because I was like, oh my God, this is my second time being able to vote for a woman, and not only a woman, but a woman of color. And that felt like, I don't know, it just was like, it felt so good to me and felt so great. And then I've also gotten to I voted for Barack Obama twice, and like thinking about how I got to vote for a Black man, and just thinking about like, yes, like, you know, this really sucks that Trump got elected for me. And like, I don't love that result. And like, at the same time, all the elections that I've been able to vote in, I've been able to cast historic ballots. You know, even the last election, like Kamala Harris, that was cool to be able to vote a VP into office.
I love that positive reframe. That's
same.
wonderful. Okay, so now we're going to get into the educational part of the day. Dr. Kelsey is going to talk to us about risk and reward in bulimia nervosa.
The gambler.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Danny. So how I would like to start is just getting us all kind of on the same page with what bulimia nervosa is. So bulimia nervosa is defined as recurrent engagement in objectively large binge eating episodes. That means eating a large amount of food in a short period of time and feeling out of control over eating, and then engaging in inappropriate compensatory behaviors to make up for that binge or to compensate for weight and shape in some way or to try to influence those things. Inappropriate compensatory behaviors, I think most commonly with bulimia nervosa, we think about self-induced vomiting, but there's a lot of different things that can happen. There's also laxative misuse, which clinically I've seen a big resurgence of in my teens that I see. I've been surprised by that. Dr. Courtney might not be surprised by that, having come from UCSD and seeing folks like at higher levels of care. But on an outpatient level, which is where I see folks, it's just been surprising to me, the resurgence of laxative misuse in teens. Also diuretics, diet pills. Another one that I see is like really scary is insulin omission and people who have insulin dependent diabetes. I have been working with a teen with that right now. Super scary. And then there's also fasting, extreme caloric restriction. And fun fact, or maybe not so fun, caloric restriction can actually look a lot more severe in bulimia nervosa than anorexia nervosa and atypical anorexia nervosa at times. And I think it's just because there's the binge and then there's these really long periods of time without eating. And then the other thing I see is pretty extreme compensatory exercise. So that can take on a bunch of different flavors. When I was at Columbia, I worked with someone who would run for 2 hours a day, every day after binge eating. And so that was like a really severe presentation. So all to say, bulimia nervosa can manifest in a bunch of different ways. It's not just binging and throwing up. And another thing I'd really like to highlight about bulimia nervosa, and I think Cindy Bulick did this well in her paper that came out like 10 years ago, is that it often occurs in people in higher weight or larger bodies. We first recognized this disorder like in the 90s. Like folks had more like normal weight bodies, so like BMIs in the low 20s. And now what I'm commonly seeing are people that are like, I'm just using BMI by the way, because it's a standard number. People just aren't getting recognized as potentially having bulimia nervosa because they're in this larger body. People aren't even asking them about purging behaviors and inappropriate compensatory behaviors. Many of my referrals come from weight management clinics for adolescents. Just like other eating disorders, bulimia nervosa affects everyone and affects people of all races, ethnicities, gender identity, sexual orientation. And so kind of to get into the research that I've been doing, one thing that clinically people often note is like this impulsivity that is involved in bulimia nervosa. Sometimes we talk about it as negative urgency or this tendency to act in ways that maybe don't serve us well in the long term in response to negative emotions. So engaging in like risky behaviors, for instance. So things like alcohol use when it's maybe not the best time to use it, drug use when it's maybe not the best time to use it, reckless driving. So I had started to get interested in like what makes my patients start to engage in risky decisions. And this was informed by a clinical observation that engaging in these behaviors often comes from like this really desperate self-guided attempt to quickly lose weight because they are in a larger body. They want the weight to go away quickly. They want to make themselves feel better quickly. And then also, interestingly, like kind of when you talk to these patients and, when I talk to my teens with bulimia nervosa about like the harms of the behaviors and talk to them and give them psychoeducation about like purging and insulin omission, for instance, and the bad things that could happen to them, they're like, oh, well, that won't happen to me. Or like, oh, well, if that happens, like it won't be so bad. At least I'll be trying to control my weight and shape. And so I kind of had this idea like percolating around and like thinking about, okay, like how do people with bulimia nervosa make these decisions? What might guide them to engage in risky behavior? In grad school, I started thinking more about reward processing more generally, because there's this idea that like people might be engaging in more risky behaviors because it's rewarding and that's what keeps them going to it. And I think like, back like a decade ago, that was a central kind of leading hypothesis that people kind of across the board that take risky decisions or engage in risky behaviors might find these things more rewarding. And I think there is some merit to that hypothesis, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced. And for instance, what we've learned from disorders of like behavioral dyscontrol, so like conduct disorder, for instance, and other disorders, reward processing does appear to be aberrant. And when we look at brain regions, like those brain regions, at least structurally, so the size and shape of them in our brains are different in people with like conduct disorder and bulimia nervosa compared to controls.
Kelsey, is ADHD also in that category?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Because I really identify with a lot of what you're saying. And, you know, I haven't had bulimia, but I'm like, this is so ADHD.
Yeah, totally. And it's so interesting too, clinically. I would say, I mean, I know there's research data on this, a third of people with bulimia nervosa also have ADHD.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that stat.
And it's also tricky because like the stimulant medication can help them, but then it can also really tip them into restriction. So it's this really delicate dance. Like these transdiagnostic similarities, and one thing that I have enjoyed doing kind of throughout my career to inform my research and spur new ideas and think deeper is going to like talks and seminars on other disorders in the field that are, you know, have some similarities to bulimia nervosa and might get me thinking about other transdiagnostic mechanisms. Unfortunately, eating disorders, our research has lagged 10 to 15 years behind every other disorder. That's not totally our fault. We haven't gotten the same level of funding, and that's very well cited compared to other disorders. Part of it being like more of a women's health issue might have led to it being less funded.
Totally agree.
But all to say, we've lagged behind. And so I like to go to other talks to learn more and kind of think about, okay, would this apply to bulimia? Would it not? When I was on postdoc at Columbia, I happened upon this talk on opioid misuse. And the researcher's name is Anna Canova, and she was studying how risk-taking impacted lapses in opioid use disorder treatment. I don't want to say bulimia nervosa is an addiction. I don't think that. It's just more that there are definitely some similarities between the two disorders. And she was studying risk-taking in this totally new way. And it kind of really opened my eyes to thinking about risk-taking as more of a multifaceted process. Her research showed that different facets of risk-taking uniquely relate to different risk-taking behaviors. We thought about risk-taking traditionally like a gambling task, like the exact odds of like an outcome. Like there's a 50-50 chance this will happen. There's a 30% chance this will happen and a 75% chance this will happen. But in reality, like in our real world, when we take risks, like we don't know the outcome. Like we don't know the odds of the decision that we're making. Like maybe we have some information to inform us. Like when I'm telling my patients, like, oh, you could have an electrolyte imbalance if you purged, you know, and that could lead to these health consequences. Or I'm telling my people who have insulin omission, like, oh, you could go into DKA and that could send you to the ICU. Like, do you want that? But I can't give them the odds of that. We don't know. So that was interesting to think about risk-taking as more of this multifaceted process. And she really broke it down and use the specific task, like a behavioral task that measures attitudes towards risk and ambiguity. So ambiguity is when you don't know like the exact odds of an outcome. And then things like impulsivity, generally like the personality trait. I don't know that we've done this with bulimia nervosa yet, and I'd be really interested to see what that looked like. And kind of compellingly with the research that she did, she found that people who were undergoing the opioid use disorder treatment, they came in weekly to get methadone from a clinic. When they came in to get methadone, they completed this behavioral task. And this was over like a 20-week period. It was like this super elegant study. It was really cool. And what they found was that when they had higher ambiguity tolerance 1 week, when they were going for options that they weren't certain of the outcome, there was more ambiguity involved, that prospectively predicted a lapse in these patients. They were able to see kind of from this like neurocognitive profile, like, okay, if they're showing higher ambiguity tolerance 1 week, they are much more likely to have a lapse the next week, which is so interesting because thinking about it clinically, if a patient like is feeling a little bit more like I could like let things fly, or like maybe, I don't know, I don't need to be like so in control of like my behavioral contingencies in my environment, and like more willing to approach like things that have some ambiguity, like they've lapsed in treatment. So that was really interesting to me.
Courtney, I can see your head spinning.
Yeah, I would love to know what you're thinking.
I just think that's so interesting. I feel like that's the opposite of maybe that's what I expected. I feel like if they can tolerate ambiguity, then maybe they would be able, like, I don't know. What is the rationale? What do you think contributes to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Anna Cadovas, who I teamed up with in part to do the study that I'll talk about in a little bit, but one of the things they talked about in her paper on this was like, well, maybe they're just more optimistic that like, bad things won't happen, or like she has like a follow-up grant to study it now to kind of probe like this optimism bias, I think is what she's calling it. The opioid use crisis is a big deal in the US right now, and trying to solve it is big. It's just kind of really fascinating to me that like, these cognitive neuroscience approaches can shed light on factors above and beyond those we traditionally think, because she included things like craving, impulsivity, risk tolerance, and then also controlled for like, prior use in the model. So, all these things that we know contribute to lapses. Ambiguity tolerance is so cool because it predicted above and beyond those things, which is really interesting.
Can you share that measure with us so that we can drop it on our website and share with our audience to take?
I'm curious. Yeah. It's also, it's making me think of, at least when we talk about eating disorders broadly, and I think specifically it's more linked to anorexia nervosa, but we talk about intolerance of uncertainty, and that's well documented as something that individuals diagnosed with anorexia struggle with. And so it's interesting that it's almost like the opposite is true in bulimia nervosa. I'm just kind of wondering, what about individuals that have ANBP? Like, where do they fall? I guess kind of thinking that anybody with an eating disorder would likely experience that intolerance of uncertainty, but it seems, like the opposite is true. So really fascinating.
Yeah, super cool. Yeah, and so all of this to say, I was like, okay, well, I have to get a pulse on what this looks like in bulimia nervosa. So I collected some pilot data on it just cross-sectionally when I was on postdoc. What does ambiguity tolerance look like with eating disorder behaviors and bulimia nervosa? And what came out, which I was surprised but also very pleased, it's like one of those like happy things in science where you're like, okay, this is cool. The more a person tolerated ambiguity on this behavioral measure, the more frequently they purged in the past 28 days, which I was like, that, I've talked about purging, like you kind of don't know when the bad thing's going to happen or if it's going to happen. So it's just really interesting to have that relation there. And it's cross-sectional. It's past 28 days. The sample is like smaller because it was a pilot study. But it was a really kind of cool finding and informed my study that's going on here at VCU, where, it's not on the scale of Anna's really elegant opioid use disorder study, but they're coming in and we're doing an MRI where they're completing this task in the scanner. They call it the lottery task. It's basically where they have the decision to pick between a fixed amount of money, and they play a lottery with known risk. So like 50-50 odds, 25, 75. Then they're choosing between this certain amount and then playing a lottery that like the odds are ambiguous. They don't know what the odds are. They just see, I can get this certain amount of money, or I can play for like $66. And so they play that, and that kind of informs their risk and ambiguity tolerance. So what's cool about that is we're getting neural representations of risk and ambiguity tolerance in the brain. And then what I'm having them do is completing it remotely 1 week out and 2 weeks out. So we can do some prospective predicting of behavior. And then we're also collecting EMA data on them to get behavioral frequencies throughout the week. We're also measuring negative urgency and planning behaviors.
Can you define negative urgency?
Yes. Negative urgency is the tendency to act rashly, and I mean that in a non-judgmental way, in response to negative emotions. It could be binge eating in response to feeling really stressed about an interpersonal situation you had earlier in the day, for instance. And then purging in response to like feeling so terrible that I just had this binge, and purging to kind of alleviate that feeling. So that's the study we've got going on now. I'm really excited to see the perspective associations. And then we're also looking at things like self-harm, substance use, drug use, got one or two other things in there.
What about like compulsive shopping or risky sexual behavior?
I think we've got risky sexual behavior, but not compulsive shopping. That's a good one. We're asking things too about their environment, asking about experiences they've had where they felt discriminated against, where they felt like they've experienced some sort of stigma, and looking at the relationships there too. So we're really hoping to get like a kind of more in-depth view of these cognitive and neural underpinnings of risk-taking and bulimia nervosa. Because I think cognitive neuroscience, it's so cool, but it's often not been well integrated with context. We're trying to make up for that. And
this study sounds so cool. When do you anticipate it to wrap?
oh gosh, probably in 2 years. But I hope to have like some preliminary data that we can present within the next year. So the other part that we're using is this thing called computational modeling. We're basically putting in different parameters, so like ambiguity tolerance, negative urgency, all these things to kind of give us a readout on when like a brain might compute that someone should engage in a certain behavior. And other disorders like depression, right now, they're using computational modeling to inform treatment, which is super cool. And then obviously like this opioid use study that I talked about, they're using the findings from that to see if they can inform treatment with those findings too. So computational modeling gets a bad rap as being like too esoteric and scientific, but I do think people are making progress putting it into treatment. So it's like a slow burn, but I hope it will help us a little bit with treating this disorder.
Based on your research, what are the treatment implications? Like as clinicians, is there something that we can take home and implement in our practice now knowing this information?
Yeah, I was going to say that, like how to target ambiguity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like that's the golden question. And I'm not sure yet. Because how do we best measure this in treatment, number one? Because the way we're measuring it now is behavioral. And like we get this readout, and we give like these people like a really quick neurocognitive assessment. And would that even be like palatable to clinicians? But what if it gave them like a readout on like where this person stood in terms of trying to reduce ambiguity tolerance? That one's like tough for me. I'm not quite sure what to do about that. You can provide psychoeducation, but beyond that, what do you do?
I'm excited to look at the measure because I feel like I'm very much a creative clinician, and I come up with my own little mini interventions all the time. So now I'm excited. I want to look at this and see what I can do.
Yeah, I love it.
Curious too. And it's interesting because you think about tolerance of ambiguity and like, do we attempt to reverse that and make people not like less tolerant of ambiguity, which seems potentially problematic? Like we actually have not a lot of control over our life and things just happen. A big part I think is like acceptance that like life is ever changing.
Yeah, and another next step is I'm working with my collaborators on thinking about designing like maybe a purging specific measure of ambiguity tolerance. We're coming up with creative ideas about what that might look like. So because right now it's just money that we're looking at, which is very broad in general, right? And so we're like, okay, how could we assess like purging ambiguity tolerance? Because that seems to be the thing that's coming out. But
wow, this is so fascinating. I'm so excited to see where your research goes and what you're able to give us to the field.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kelsey. And I just have to say, you are a true researcher when you use words like elegant and cool to talk about cognitive neuroscience. I love it. I love it. And I'm also, as I was saying to Jason when he was here, I'm very envious of researchers because it was a path I wanted to go down, but I did not have the self-control to do it.
It's
too much.
The self-control to do
research.
Yeah, because you have to like set up deadlines for yourself. You have to like nobody's really holding you accountable. You have to analyze your data on your own. If you want to get it published, you have to write it up and have that chutzpah to do that. And like I can see patients all day long because they're showing up here. And if I'm not here, that's a problem. And I can do their notes thanks to AI, especially now that I'm relying on. But research is really hard. You have to be super, super self-motivated.
It's, I feel like it's well suited to my personality. And I have to say, like, doing clinical work is really, really hard because, like, I see patients for a 4-hour block and then I'm like depleted for the rest of the night. I'm just like, I come home and my partner's like, you had clinic today, didn't you? And I'm like, yeah.
Okay, well, this is a perfect foray into our
Interview the expert.
Okay, so you say you get a little bit depleted by clinical work. I must say I get energized. Like if I have a day that I'm waking up, I'm not feeling good. Like Wednesday, for example, when I woke up after the election and felt bad, I had a pretty full day with patients, and I felt so good after the day of seeing them and energized. So I'm an extrovert. Are you an introvert?
I would say I'm an extroverted introvert. So
What does that mean?
I like people. I like being around people, but I also very much like my like alone time and like space to like process my thoughts. So
How do
yeah,
you recharge? Do you like to be by yourself or do you like to socialize?
a mix of both, really. Like I like to be around like close friends. I have clinic 1 to 5 right now on Mondays. So I like to come home and cook. Yeah, just something that feels like grounding and being productive. Classic, like being productive. Like just doing something that feels like good and engages my senses and like gets me out of my head.
And I was saying earlier too that we all kind of have ties together. So Kelsey, you're an intern at UCSD, right?
I did my internship at Stanford, but I did my grad school at KU, just like you.
Yeah, but I feel like, why did I feel like you have another connection with
UCSD.
Courtney?
Okay.
Maybe because
Brit's there.
Yeah.
Brit's there. Well,
Yeah.
so because I met Kelsey mostly through Alex Muratori. So one of my best friends, Alex and I did internship at UCSD together. Then Alex went to Columbia for postdoc where Kelsey was. And then Kelsey went down to VCU. And I was thinking about this as I was thinking about talking with you, Kelsey, because I think it was like just about 2 years ago now where we were talking about me coming to VCU and working with you and Annie and making that plan like a little bit more formalized. And because then Greg and I went to Richmond for Thanksgiving and told his parents that we were moving back to Richmond. And we had started looking at houses. And then a week after Thanksgiving, I went to Indonesia. And I think I was supposed to meet with either like you or Annie the day that I got back. And I felt so bad because we've been talking about me coming to VCU for a while. But obviously I was like, if my husband just dumped me on a boat in Indonesia, I'm not going to move to Richmond, Virginia, where he's from. So
no.
yeah, I remember feeling so bad about that. And I don't think I was like telling people also at the time, like what actually happened. But now obviously I'm super open about it. But what a time. So
we were like so excited to have you. And then because she was going to help us build up like the clinical arm of our operations, since Annie and I are research focused. Then I remember when you told us, I was just like, oh my God, like do not even worry about it.
Okay, so you saying Stanford made me realize too. So it's like the whole eating disorders world is so, it's like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Like we all could probably connect ourselves by 7 degrees. So also you were at Stanford when Kara was there, right? When I was on internship at UCLA, she was my roommate. And then yes, you went to KU, but not while I was there. You were in Britt's cohort, right? Okay, so that's probably where it all ties together.
And Kelsey, you also interviewed for postdoc at UCSD, right?
I did. Yeah. I was like, so for my first year of postdoc, my like life situation was also all complicated because my partner, who we now finally live together here in Richmond, and his family is here, he was matching for residency that year. Didn't know where he was going to match. I really loved California. I wanted to stay there. And I was like, I'll get good training at either Stanford or UCSD. And both were like super appealing to me. And then Stanford, I love Kara. I adore her. And not moving was also nice. Stayed there. But yeah, it was like this weird time of balancing life stuff with professional things.
Our careers don't make it easy to like settle down in one space during that point of time, because you move somewhere for grad school and then for internship and then for postdoc and potentially again for a job. So it's like you're bouncing around from different pockets. And how do you build a stable like friend group or partnership, right? When you're constantly thinking about, okay, I have to move again in a couple years.
Yeah, that's why I had what I call for now boyfriends. I knew they weren't going to be forevers. I was like, you're going to be with me on this ride here in Oklahoma, here in Kansas. Okay, maybe in LA. Okay, maybe in San Diego. Bye.
Oh my God, yeah. And Alex, we met in Kansas and we were together there for like a year and a half. And then I went West Coast, he went East Coast. And then I was West Coast for 2 years. And I was like, this is a little much because this feels like this thing is like forever, ever. I need to get closer. And Columbia was doing a lot of computational modeling with eating disorders, which is like what I was interested in too. So I was like, well, this is a good fit. And then I was going to work with Tim Walsh, and I'm like, Tim Walsh is amazing. You know, went up there and was really close to Alex because he was in the Philly area. And then also it was like COVID when I moved there. So I ended up like living with him basically for 6 months anyway. And then VCU was just really fortuitous because Annie Hana's got a job here. They were like, you can recruit a colleague for psychiatry to come build this program with you. She was like, do you want to come? And I was like, yeah, sign me up. And like, it was also great because Alex's family is here. Everything worked out really, really well. And it was just interesting because I was at this place in my life at the end of postdoc where I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my career. I really want to do research, but it also seems really hard to get a faculty job.
Where are you from originally? Where'd you grow up? And like, what's your nuclear family like?
I grew up actually like on the Georgia-Alabama border in Georgia, close, like technically the Atlanta metro area, but the county actually touches Alabama. So I grew up there, and then I'm the oldest of 3 girls, so very much like oldest daughter energy. Mom and dad just retired to North Georgia mountains, and my 2 sisters are very artsy fartsy. So one is an opera singer, and she is back in Atlanta, and then one's in Birmingham, Alabama. Yeah. And she does like graphic design, like website design for a startup company and marketing type stuff. I love my younger sisters. They've been really great supports like with the election because we're all 3 of us are like super liberal, and then my parents are conservative. So that's been, politics are off limits at family gatherings. So.
And what is the political climate of VCU? Is it one of those like blue dots in a more or less red state?
Yeah, and Courtney can speak to this too. VCU is it's like very social justice oriented, so very liberal, and like, and I would say Richmond City is very liberal too. And the state's like pretty purple. I would say what's nice about it is you don't forget that there's those other perspectives out there. Also, at least in my experience the past 2 years of living here, the perspectives usually can coexist pretty well. I will say, Alex and I, on Wednesday, we are members of a golf club, and we went to go play 9 holes of golf on Wednesday afternoon because I just needed to blow off some steam and just like hit those golf balls real hard. And we like went to have dinner at the golf club after we finished, and people were popping bottles of champagne because Trump won.
My parents are liberal in Oklahoma, so I get their unique perspective of how, as my mom says, how Trumpstery people are. I feel like I'm not totally in the dark, but I still, you know, being in LA, and I think also you probably, Courtney, being in Seattle, especially in the queer scene, are chosen bubbles, right?
Yeah. Well, Seattle is just so blue for space, I feel like. So.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
So,
true.
Kelsey, what made you interested? Like, what was sort of your path of what made you interested in psychology first and foremost, and what made you interested in eating disorders?
Yeah, I think they were like diverging things, and then they came together. So I can speak to the psychology part first. I went to Emory for undergrad in Atlanta. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be a doctor. And my parents were like, when you're smart, you're a doctor. My dad grew up in a small town and was the first in his family to go to college. And then my mom, she has an associate's degree, but didn't like do college. And so I think that was like their perspective on things. I'm definitely not first gen, but you know, like just first, I guess, professional degree. I got to college and I was like, I hate vomit. I hate blood. Like, I have to do those things if I want to be a physician. And like, I just like didn't like it. And then I also like Emory had this really cool curriculum. I don't know if they still do, where you can like take a bunch of different classes to satisfy the core curriculum. And I noticed myself gravitating towards psych classes and also public health classes, but they were like public behavior kind of things. This Emory has the CDC right there next to it. So the public health curriculum is really strong. And so, you know, I was learning about things like health behaviors around like HIV AIDS epidemic, and I just found myself consistently gravitating toward that. And I think it was my junior year of college. I was kind of late to the game where I was like, actually, I want to be a clinical psychologist. I don't know anybody who's a clinical psychologist, but I want to do this. And
did you say your junior year?
Mm-hmm.
That's my exact story too.
Wow. Yeah.
And because I wanted to be a, this is hilarious. I don't know if I've ever said this. I wanted to be like a plastic surgeon.
You also wanted to, and you're in LA.
And well, then I'm in LA, but also I'm working with eating disorders and talking to people about accepting your appearance.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah.
So I took a hard right there. But
love it.
yeah, but I remember telling my dad, because my parents were very much pushing it. I remember telling him I was going to get my PhD, and he goes, "You still going to get to be called a doctor, right?" And I was like, "Yes." So I imagine yours was also partly that. Like, you're like, "I'll still be a doctor, parents."
Yeah. Yeah. My parents were like, I mean, I will say they were like deeply upset that I was not going to be a physician. I think because that was what they thought their like smart daughter should do. And they've really come around to it, though, I have to say. Like, they're very excited and proud. And
how could they not be? Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Seriously.
And oh, thanks. And so yeah, and I was kind of a late bloomer to like the clinical psychology train, I felt like, at my time. And then eating disorders, I did like competitive ballet growing up. I was the youngest by like 2 years, and I remember just being this like very painfully shy. But I would kind of sit there and just listen to their conversations. My first exposure to purging was that we had a male in our company, and he was talking about making himself throw up to lose weight. And I just remember being like really curious about that. Like that feels like really extreme. And I'm also, full disclosure, I'm also emetaphobic, like really badly. So, like,
Which is, I'm sorry, can we talk about the irony of you studying Bulimia Nervosa?
Yeah, everyone says that.
It's so funny.
Everyone says that to me, and it's not beyond me. I totally get it. I'm like, well, I can hear them talk about it. It's just like the actual like act and like the sound of the vomiting that really gets to me. But like, people can talk about it and it's fine with me. I've gotten to the point where I like watch videos on YouTube. I did that, and like it was fine. But it's just like something with a real live person next to me that if like they start like gagging, I'm like, I'm out. Bye.
Okay, so another question somewhat related. Are you going to have children? Do you want to have children?
Yes, we have been talking about having children, and that has come up.
Get ready for it.
I know. Yeah, Alex had food poisoning about this time last year, and he is a loud vomiter. And I know. And so, like, we live in like a row house in the fan, like Courtney knows what I'm talking about. Like, it's like a historic neighborhood in Richmond, and we live in this like 2-story like row house, and it was just like echoing throughout the house, and I could not get any free from it.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
so,
I
yeah.
have my kids have both slept with me at various times. I have woken up with vomit in my own hair, and I've become the vomit catcher, where like literally on a plane I got applauded because I looked at my son and I was like, he's gonna barf, and I got to grab someone's Dorito bag and put it under his mouth. It's just, there's so much barfing with kids, and also just the spit up when they're newborns.
Yeah.
Is intense.
Yeah. Alex and I have had conversations about this. Like, spit up, I think, is like fine with me. But yeah, after he got food poisoning, he was like, "What are you gonna do?" And like, we have a kid that has like a stomach bug, and I was like, "I'll figure it out." Or you will. He's an ER doctor, so he's like totally used to all the bodily fluids. So I'm just like, "Or you can," and he's like, "Yeah, okay."
That's so cool. Okay, well, this leads me to like one of my like final questions. So yeah, I know your husband is a physician and you're a super hardworking research scientist. How do you all make it work in your relationship to get enough time? Because those are both really demanding careers.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's like a constant, like concerted effort and like a lot of communications. He works half the weekends of the month, often works like odd shifts. Today, for instance, he's working like 2 to 11 p.m. So we don't have like Friday night, and he's working that the rest of the weekend too. I would say that we talk about when we're going to have like a date night. And then he's just coming off of 3 days of being off. And like, that's hard too, because he is off when I'm on. And so one of the like pieces of advice that I took, from some other people in the field is like, you really just have to flex like your time. They're like, you can be flexible as an academic, like you can shift when you work. So for instance, on Wednesday, we went to the golf course at like 2:30 to like 6. And so when I came home, I did like 2 hours worth of work when I got home and just like flexed it that way. So it's just like a balance. Like, and just trying to like align things and like make things a priority.
I also want to see a picture of your house. I'm obsessed with like historic homes, so you're gonna have to send me some pictures. I'll drop it in the visual too.
I will. Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge and your life with us. So last, let's talk about what would you like for people to do for their homework? You better work.
Work it, y'all.
So my homework is actually not like related to the research I presented, but kind of getting back to the bigger picture of bulimia nervosa. So believe it or not, people have approached me and asked me, why am I doing research on bulimia nervosa? We've got treatments that work. We've got a drug that works, fluoxetine. But actually, like, those treatments don't work for everybody. Like, we have CBT. We've got some evidence for DBT. We've got evidence for FBT for adolescents with bulimia nervosa. But a lot of people don't have access to those treatments. We only have one drug for bulimia nervosa, and those trials were run in the 90s. So I think my call to action is like research on bulimia nervosa and binge eating, quite frankly, it's needed because this is a problem that is not solved. These disorders are still out there. These people still need help. This issue is not going away. So my call to action would just be, let's also not forget about these people too.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, and we still see a lot of that in our practice. You know, it's not a mental illness that is cured by any means at all. All right. Well, thanks again, Dr. Kelsey, and Dr. Courtney and I will see you next time on Mean Girls, where Dr. Janet Leidecker is going to talk to us about bullying in individuals with eating disorders. So we will see you all next time.
See y'all next time.